Given their recent buff, are Retaliations now better than Countdown for endgame farming in the Division 2? This is a question that I've been seeing a lot since this week's patch went live, and I found it quite fascinating given that Countdown has been the undisputed king for years now. So today I've done some investigating, crunched some numbers, and I want to present my findings to you all, and by the end of it, you may just be surprised by the result. Oh, and hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. Hope you end up enjoying this video. If so, and you want to see more like it from me on the game, then be sure to subscribe. Shout out and thank you to our channel members for your ongoing support of my work. It means so much to me that so many of you have gone that extra mile, so thank you. But without further ado, let's jump into this. Alright, now before we get into anything else, let us recap what exactly has changed with Retaliations this week. How has it suddenly become a contender in this race? Well, the one major change that has kind of flown under the radar, I've not seen a lot of people talking about this, is that Retaliations are now the third ever mode and content to allow for customized targeted loot selection. Yeah, if you did not realize, you can tab to the Retaliations page on your map, click the same prompt as usual at the bottom to open up the menu. On the surface, this might not seem huge, but our only two previous options for this were Countdown and Summit. Countdown has always beaten out Summit in terms of loot quantity. The thing is, Retaliations have always had great drop quantity since they were released. It was the inability to target what those drops were that made it more unideal. That has now been fixed. The other notable change, as highlighted in the Year 7 Season 2.2 patch notes, is that Retaliations have been fixed, so that completing control points within the mode now properly grants you Shade Experience, Season XP, and materials. So, in combination, these two changes have shifted the conversation a lot around the viability of farming within this mode. The patch notes also suggest that this is not the end of the improvements, stating that we are continuing to look at more ways to enhance them in future updates. So, we could very well be having this conversation all over again in a few months' time, but for now, since we have the changes covered, let's talk about my testing method. I want to acknowledge right off the bat that there is no perfect method to directly compare two entirely different modes, especially when conditions can vary from run to run. In Countdown, for example, which countermeasures you get can vary, which objectives you have to do in terms of the travel time between them. There's also the element of teammate decisions. Do they decide to go and do VIP, which takes a significant number of time? Do they choose to do all three objectives instead of just two? Do they call the chopper in early, which reduces the total loot you can earn? In Retaliations, there's considerations like how many control points are you getting for the selected zone? How many kill squads do you end up getting? There's also a consideration of the time investment needed just to play the activity. Countdown is an instant queue, whereas Retaliations you need to fill the agitation meter for each faction. With the daily project that they added as well as the buffed rates for that, I don't think the meter is too much of a consideration, personally, but it is an additional time requirement nonetheless if you're going to break this down by minute-to-minute efficiency. So, with all of that in mind, here is how I did my testing. Given the more randomized elements of both of these modes, I did not try to do several runs of each to find like the optimal run. I tried to be representational of the more RNG elements and consider people's limited time, so I just ended up going with the first run of each one, meaning my Retaliation was in a 2 control point zone, so you have to keep in mind that that would impact things like time taken and the loot amount earned if I were to be in a 4 control point zone. For example, I also ended up getting 2 kill squads. You can do runs where you get up to 3 or 0, so that can vary a lot. In my Countdown run, we did not get the close range damage countermeasure, which usually speed things up by a lot. My teammates also decided to tackle VIP, which can increase the time. So elements like those are always going to change. That is a factor to consider, and we'll be sure to discuss that more in the analysis portion. Beyond those things, my other metrics were kept identical between each of these runs. I timed my runs from the moment I loaded in to the moment the activity was completed. I marked what exact Shade XP level I was at and where I was after to completion to account for both activity and kill rewards. I also noted how many backpack slots I had available before starting. I then went and picked up all pieces of loot dropped as junk so that I could mark how much I had then earned afterwards. One note on the loot, I did not choose to include control point chests in my Retaliation run, as they are not technically a part of the mode's rewards. I believe they remain unclaimable if you had already done that control point earlier in that day. I did, however, claim all of available countdown chests, as that is directly part of the mode's rewards and they're available each time you run the mode. Finally, I then played both activities on heroic difficulty for a consistent experience and comparison. Many might argue that countdown is most commonly played at challenging, and that's totally valid. The rewards that we're going to look at may and certainly will scale depending on what difficulty you do play on. For me, I don't really run either of these activities below heroic, so we're going to compare them at their highest respective scales. Oh, and finally, I targeted assault rifles in both modes just for drop consistency, plus a greater exotic pool to try and represent chances for those to drop, if applicable. I believe that covers just about everything about my methodology, so let's take a look at the results. For Retaliation, once again this was on heroic difficulty in a 2 control point zone, doing a completely solo run. In total, it took me 9 minutes and 23 seconds to complete. I looted 39 items in total, including 1 exotic drop. I earned a total of 947,320 SHD experience, which roughly equates to like 1 1/3 shade levels. And then, given that I successfully completed the run, I was also granted 1 exotic cache, 1 named item cache, and roughly 1/2 of the required materials to craft a reconstructed cache. So, that was the Retaliation run. Now looking at Countdown, once again this is on heroic difficulty, an 8-player run. In total, this took me 16 minutes and 51 seconds. I looted 57 items in total. I earned 800,360 shade experience, which is just over 1 SHD level, and by the end of the mode, I had earned 208 countdown tokens. To note, this is not enough for an exotic cache, which is at 224, but it is enough to buy a named, season, or optimization cache. So, how do we interpret this? I'm going to leave these numbers up for a little bit as we discuss. Let's just go down the list and compare the stats. Time investment wise, a 2-point retaliation does take a notably shorter amount of time. Of course, this would increase if we were to get a 3 or 4 control point zone, just like Countdown's time may decrease if I were to play on challenging, but on average, I'm going to say the retaliations are a little bit quicker. As far as loot quantity, Countdown definitely still reigns supreme here. My retaliation amount could be increased if you factor in control point chests, if I had gotten a 3rd kill squad, if I were in a 3 to 4 control point zone, but again, on average, Countdown is likely still going to net you a more consistent number of drops. As far as XP earned, I'd say Retaliations absolutely takes the win, whereas Countdowns will roughly be the same every time. That value that I got for my Retaliation run is at its floor, right? If you add an additional 1 to 2 control points, that would easily boost this well beyond 1 million. Then as far as the mode-specific rewards, it's interesting. I feel like many would still argue that Countdown has the better reward loop, with these tokens being able to be spent on anything at the station that you like, but the guaranteed exotic and named item cache for completing a retaliation is nothing to scoff at. This means that you can get a guaranteed exotic component every 10-ish minutes from retaliation. I'm not sure if that same reward structure applies if you play below heroic, so that's definitely a consideration, but then again you would also earn even less countdown tokens if you were to play below heroic as well, so I think those completion rewards are something very interesting and definitely worth keeping in mind. Alright, so you've seen the stats, what's my analysis? Can we definitively say whether Retaliations or Countdown is the more efficient mode to farm? I don't think we can, unfortunately. But honestly, I think that's a good thing, because whereas Countdown has been the far and away best option for years, Retaliations have now come along and offered very solid competition. And really, I think with the current reward structure, each mode excels in different ways depending on what you're going for. If you're farming exotics, in particular, I would say Retaliations are the way to go. There's the entire exotic blueprint system, which I've not mentioned yet, but if you're actually needing specific exotics, then this is absolutely the way to go. But just in terms of farming them for components, guaranteed caches upon completion of heroic, plus the world drop chances, again I got an exotic on my run, that's really good. Also, if you want the most amount of shade experience while farming high volumes of loot, especially during like 3 times or 5 times XP events, Retaliations have to be the way to go. You get frequent control point clears, also the ability to use direct objectives if desired. On the other hand, if you're farming named items in particular, then I think Countdown absolutely remains the top way to go. You get a decent number in Retaliations from bosses and kill squads, but the 100 drops in Countdown are just too good. Because of that reason, and also the higher than average drop quantity, Countdown remains the superior farm for expertise levels if your method is item donation. Collecting all of that loot, all of those named items, being able to donate them, and then just jump straight back into another run, that's just too good of a loop. Well, my friends, I think that just about concludes my analysis and the discussion on the viability between the reigning champ of Countdown and the new kid on the block with Retaliations. Again, while I don't think we can conclusively say which is better given the number of variables between the two, having Retaliations come anywhere close to Countdown is a win in my book, given how long it's remained unchallenged. And as we covered, the devs are looking into making ways for Retaliation to be even more rewarding. Could that tip the scales even further? We'll just have to wait and see. I hope you ended up finding this video informative. Whatever thoughts you may have about this conversation or any questions about my testing methods or anything else, let me know down below. I very much look forward to reading through what you've got to say. That is just about going to do it for me today. So, thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you back soon. RogueGold.